All right, perfect. All right, welcome to True Crime Convos. I am going to get our video started. Give me just a second. Welcome, Dr. Kari Nixon. So sorry. If you want to join us on your video, Dr. Kari, you can press the little hamburger symbol at the very bottom if you would like to. Hopefully you can see and hear. Let me know if you have any problems with that. You are currently muted, if that helps.
I don't see a hamburger.
There you are. Okay, great. I can hear you, so that's a good thing. And I'll invite you to video if that makes it a little bit easier.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's a new app. You are teaching me new things.
There.
Hello. Thank you for joining
Hi.
me.
Thank you so much for having me. It really means so much.
Yeah, no, I saw your. Oh, sorry. Before we get started, everybody, let me go into the spiel of things. So, welcome to True Crime Convos. As you know, we meet here every other Tuesday on the Fireside app. You're also watching us live on Twitch and on YouTube. So, if you have any questions that you would like to ask Dr. Nixon as she shares her story of survival with us, please feel free to put those in whatever chat you'd like. We do ask that you maintain some courtesy and decorum, as Dr. Judge Doro, who is famous from the Waukesha case, says. So we want to make sure that Dr. Nixon is comfortable with any questions that you ask and is okay telling you, aka we're fine with you not answering any questions that you don't feel comfortable with. We're not meant to be invasive into your space or into anything that you don't feel comfortable answering, just because you may still be dealing with things, etc. So feel free to shut down any questions that you do not want to answer. So before we get started, I wanted to share how we kind of came to be, how this episode came to be, if you will. I saw a post. I was monitoring the True Crime Podcast Festival or Twitter, and I saw a couple of posts that you had made basically asking creators and anybody talking about Munchausen syndrome by proxy, as some people know it. Now it's kind of turned into factitious disorder imposed on another. So I don't know which one you're more comfortable saying or which one's the most appropriate one.
Either is fine.
Okay. But yeah, I saw your kind of call to action there, and it took me a minute because I wanted to make sure that I'm prepared. I don't purport to be a great interviewer or anything like that. I truly treat this as a conversation. And so I usually like to let the person what prompted you initially to share that message on Twitter?
That time, because I feel like I've been somewhat screaming into a void about this for the better part of 6 years. And so every so often I just get really mad and post something again. This time I heard something about Munchausen on a true crime podcast. Um, I listen to true crime, of course, but I also teach a true crime media ethics class.
Oh, wow.
And so I think about these things a lot, both personally and sort of professionally, I guess you could say. Um, and it's actually, I was listening to a podcast that I tend to recommend as a more ethical one. And they didn't really do anything awful. It was actually a side note of a case.
Mm.
But I think I was already worked up about it. And in that same breath, they had like contacted an expert about um, bipolar. I guess bipolar had been part of the situation as well. And so they had contacted an expert, but they didn't contact any about Munchausen. And I just got so mad. And I actually, at that moment, I just was like, I'm giving up. Like, instead of being mad, I was just so sad. And my
Mm.
post, I think, showed that a little bit, that, like, because I've been trying to get one podcaster, one journalist, one op ed editor. Like, I write op eds and do podcasts for a living in my career. I mostly study health and society and how our like health affects our identity. Can't imagine why I study that. um,
Truly.
yeah. I truly didn't know for a long time, which we can go into that at some
Yeah.
point. But anyway, I was like, I'm giving up. Like, I can't devote any more emotional energy to this thing that's not going to happen. And you showed up in my inbox, you and one other person. And for the first time, because I've had people contact me before publicly, like on my posts,
Hmm.
and they say they'll get back to me and they don't. And it struck me when you and this one other podcaster who does the Pretend podcast,
Oh, Javier. Yes.
yeah,
He's great.
both actually just said, like, let's schedule a time. Here's the date. Let's go. I was like, do you know what? It never occurred to me. Somebody could have done this all along.
Yeah.
Like, you have the equipment, you have the platform. Just put somebody on, like, and nobody else has ever actually done that. And so and then I realized you were Lady Hobbs. It's like,
Nobody, truly.
oh my God, no, no, no. I was fangirling like a crazy person.
Oh my
Like,
gosh. Thank you. No, I honestly, I talked about this before, but it's been really eye-opening, engaging with survivors of crime and family advocates who've lost a family member, unfortunately, due to some, criminal activity or, murder, etc. um, it's an intimidating thing, I think, for newer podcasters to approach survivors of crime. But what I'm finding out, kind of combating my own timidness in that, because I typically never do things like that, or never did things like that. Rather, now I do. Um, but I was always worried about kind of re-traumatizing them. But I realized that by not reaching out and by not asking them to share their stories, I'm actually stifling their voice more than I am protecting it, which is what I thought I was doing. I thought I was protecting it, by saying, like, I don't want you to feel um, triggered by this conversation, so I'm not even going to mention it to you. And truly, what we find out is you want to just be asked. You want to be tapped on the shoulder and said, "Hey, do you have anything you want to say? Or is there anything you'd like me, to share or to point out?" And I think this is what's so great about now having this platform, is that I can branch out from what true crime cases is, which is a strictly narrative podcast show. It's not one that I have guests on or anything like that anymore. I used to do it, but it made me too nervous. It was overwhelming for me to have interviews on there and edited, etc. But having this, it's more casual, it's more engaging. I'm truly wanting to hear and know your story. And I think that the audience that listens in, either that's listening now, thank you, by the way, you guys, for joining us on YouTube and on Twitch. I think they want to kind of peel back those layers and not have kind of the circus of a sterilized show. They want to see the real person. They want to hear from the real person who survived this. So hopefully more people and more podcasters reach out to you. Sometimes, unfortunately, it can be performative, or they'll say, oh my gosh, I'll reach out to you immediately and we'll talk and do all these things. And then as you see, they don't follow up with you. But Javier is an excellent podcaster. He is incredibly talented as a journalist, and my gosh, he could do so much, I'm sure, with the story you're going to share. So I highly encourage you to continue that relationship because he is just one of the best out there. um, but I know people are joining us because they want to hear your story of survival, and so I really want to give you the floor in sharing that and kind of how it all started, because from what I saw from the information that I was able to pull, I didn't want to do too much because I really truly want to hear it first from you before I read it anywhere else or read little snippets here and there. Um, kind of how this all started.
Yeah, I was going to say it helps me if you're willing to, like, sometimes structuring questions can help me
Yes.
because when we're talking about something as vast as like identity and history,
Yeah,
it
it's a lot.
sometimes I don't know where to start.
Yeah. I think the thing that I'm most curious about for myself is understanding who your abuser was, because this is abuse, right? Is that how you would
Mhm.
categorize it?
Yes, and I personally find it a little problematic that it's considered like a mental health diagnosis.
Hmm.
I feel two ways about that. I'm not sure what the solution is, but yes, I would think of it more as abuse.
Yeah. I've gone back and forth on that too. I've dealt, in reviewing the most, I think, notable cases are the ones with Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Dee Dee, Blanchard, but then also Lacey Spears, who murdered her child over this. So you had two kind of opposites. You had the victim kind of responding back to the abuse, and then you had an actual, child who lost their life because of his mother's continuous abuse of his health. Um, but I always kind of struggled with that as well, because I do think at some point there is a mental illness underlying that, but I think that it's irresponsible to solely blame it on that, because this person is making an actual choice because of the feeling they get from it. It's the same thing like with, I think individuals who have an addiction issue. It's a disease, but it's also a choice. So I think it's kind of multi-factored. It's not just one size fits all. But if you're
Yeah.
comfortable
Well,
kind of just starting with that in terms of how the abuse started, as far as you are aware.
mm, yeah. Well, I think the important thing to I mention first is that I didn't realize what had happened until I was 25. And so that's a bit different, I think, than some other survivors. And I think one thing that's really important to me, sort of advocacy wise, is getting people to understand that Munchausen by proxy is a spectrum like any other form of abuse. What we see in the media is only one extreme for the most part, whether it's in fiction or true crime journalism. We see the worst cases because those are the ones that get caught. Um, in one way, you could argue that the more successful abuser is the one who does enough milder things that they don't ever get caught.
Right.
um, a lot of the literature, although there's not much literature, and that's my other advocacy point, is like, I just want more and more people interested in this, realizing it exists way more commonly than we think based on what we see in the media, so that there's graduate students going to grad school saying they want to study this. Like, we have so few articles on Munchausen by proxy that I could literally read everything that's ever been written on it. If I took out the case studies, if I took out the things that were like one person, they were saying, I saw this in my clinic, any actual state study with more than one person, we have some, I don't know, a couple hundred articles.
Oh, wow.
Um, I mean, it's so we don't know most of the things we don't know, but like what the literature says, they don't really have data on people being abused by this condition after like 14.
Mm.
And the worst of my memory of my abuse was after 14. So in one way, I say sometimes like I was a derpier survivor than most people because I just like I didn't
Yeah,
know.
sure.
Yeah, I had
Yeah.
no even having left the house to go to college and like I was never sick after that. I still I know one of my college roommates is on here who is my maid of honor at my wedding. She was like, "Yeah, we remember like you would say things like, "Oh, I can't like do this activity because it will hurt my condition." But they were like, "But you were never sick." I just thought I was in remission
Oh my
forever.
gosh.
I don't,
So what were you told you had?
fibromyalgia.
Oh, and that's really difficult in general to get diagnosed. So it's interesting, that that the abusers like pick these diseases and they're really well versed in like sharing the symptoms and understanding the medications and their interactions, etc. Um, that one, I that's insane to me because I'm just like there's so much you could do to somebody just trying to get them diagnosed and tested alone for fibromyalgia. And knowing people who truly do suffer from that disease, how long it took them to even get a diagnosis and all the testing that they had to go through. So it's just astounding to me that that was the case for you.
That's my theory too, is that they most often make use of already poorly understood disorders because of
Mhm.
course that's the easier way to do it. And in fact, a lot of times they use mental disorders because how do you prove or disprove that your kid has depression if
Mm,
or anxiety? You could tell a doctor that they're feeling these way and that you notice these symptoms. Some of the symptoms of depression are behavioral things. They're not,
mhm,
necessarily subjective feelings. And so I always say, like, I wish I now that I have a little bit of a voice here through you. One thing that's also really important to me is to show people in the chronic disease community and the mental health community and the disabled community that like we are part of your fight because what is being weaponized against us is the same things that are poorly understood about those communities.
mhm.
And so sometimes I think I've been met occasionally with people who actually suffer fibromyalgia, let's say, and their response is sort of like they feel that the reality of fibromyalgia is being attacked. And I think that makes them want to kind of pull away from what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that we have the same fight. Because if people understood or cared more in the medical research community about fibromyalgia and chronic pain, then we would also have a better understanding so that it couldn't be misused to abuse children and people would care and help you as well.
Right.
Um, I get the same question all the time, and I mostly refuse to answer it on the internet. I get questions about if I think that trans, like gender reassignment medicine, could be
Oh,
used by a mom to abuse a kid. And I won't answer it because there's too much of a possibility that these people are not asking in good faith about
correct.
Munchausen by proxy, but are asking because they want to make claims about the trans community. And the one thing I will say is the only thing that can help everybody is more research.
Right.
More research about trans kids and what they need, and more research about us too. And so, yeah. So I guess what I'll say, going back, my three big things are that it's a spectrum. We don't think physical abuse has to break bones to count as physical abuse. A bruise still counts. Um, we need more research. We know so little, and we have the same fight as all these other marginalized communities, and need that research. So, for
Mhm,
instance, I don't know if we really just interviewed a bunch of survivors. Maybe there were many people like me who had no idea until they were much older. But
mhm,
the literature doesn't show anybody. I think it's kind of circular because I believe that a lot of victims don't know they were victims. I think it's common because the number of people, as I've told my story just to anybody I met, I mean, like my dentist, my massage therapist, like anybody, you meet me and I'm like screaming to the
by the
rooftops about
way.
Munchausen by proxy.
Right.
Yes, because I just haven't had any other way, right? I couldn't
Yeah.
get content creators, so I was like, I'll just tell everybody who like ordering at McDonald's, have you heard about Munchausen by proxy, the hidden epidemic?
Yeah.
Um, and the number of people who go white in the face and say, I didn't know that being given painkillers every day for mundane problems counted as child abuse. Like they're
I mean,
learning it by hearing it from me. And
that's
so
crazy.
my theory is that it starts with this platform that
Hmm.
people need to hear. And I will go into specifics so that that
Oh
can be
no,
done. But
totally.
I think because survivors don't, I think that there actually are many who don't realize as teenagers. And the amount of mental work you have to do to look back at your history and suspect your own mother, number one, of because if I'm not saying it's worse than physical abuse, but it's tricky because physical abuse, if somebody hits you, you know that that hurts.
Hmm.
But if somebody's handing you a pill and saying, I love you, this is going to help you, how all of our moms did that at some point.
Yeah.
I'm a mom. I do that.
Yeah, it's a
But
different, I think it's different being manipulated by somebody you love and by somebody who's supposed to love you, and protect you. And so
and what are
reconciling
the
that.
circumstances that would make you, Lainey, like stop and be like, should my mom have given me that cold medicine?
Right.
It's a
Yeah, no.
lot of like to do that, and then to also, because you have the added authority of whatever doctors, that
Hmm.
seems to make it real, especially in our Western society. We're like, well, the doctor thought it was legit,
Yeah. Like you
and
wouldn't
many
think
of
a
us,
doctor would do that to you. That
yep,
it's only a child. I mean, if you're looking back at it as an adult, right? And if I went through the same thing, I would look back on it trying to rationalize and say, there's no way a doctor would give a 15-year-old, oxy and think
yeah,
that it was okay. They understand and know the risks that potentially when people are exposed to opioids in their teens, they're more likely to become addicted to them later in their life, or that's how the addiction typically starts, is because they're exposed to it in their teen years and given strong
oh,
opioids. I just heard it on a podcast. That's the only reason I said it. Shout out to Charlie at Crime Lines for letting me know that. Um,
no, that's
but
yeah,
you wouldn't
yeah,
think a doctor would do that unless they truly understood the risk, and the risk has to be worth it to treat the symptom. And
right.
I can
And I
understand that
think
that's
also
difficult.
a lot of survivors I've talked to, I have had more trouble admitting this as much as I'm like more comfortable like shouting into the ether than some people. Like I have trouble admitting this, but a lot of us being ill gets to be a habit
Mhm.
when you're living this way. And so a lot of us, because our abuse was through gaslighting, in addition to other things, we're very, very, very good at self gaslighting. And a lot of us sometimes feel like, well, I was feeling sick. Like I was laying on the couch, wasn't I? Like because you get kind of used to that role. And so a lot of us don't. You have to think about like suspecting your mom, suspecting the doctors, but suspecting your own experiences and identity. Like
Mhm.
because if you're disabled through part of your childhood, that's a part of your history, your narrative, who you grew up thinking you were. Um, and one thing I only just recently learned, and this is one thing I'll start with, is we think of Munchausen most frequently from the media. Most of the really bad cases involve a mom actually sort of poisoning the child. But a lot of the cases actually involve just feigning illness. And I only just learned this from starting to read through all the literature on it. Most of them, I believe it's a majority of cases. I'm not fully sure, but I believe a majority of cases, there was something wrong initially.
Mm.
So what I remember from my teenage years is I was playing the viola, which is like a big violin, and my hands are much too small. They should not have let me play a viola. And I had like hand pain, and
Hmm.
it snowballed from there until I was on 80 milligrams of morphine a day, and then oxycodone crushed up into a powder and mixed with sugar and held under my tongue for breakthrough pain. Um, so for the longest time, I felt like, well, it was me. If anything, it was me, and I had psychosomatic pain, and we don't value psychosomatic pain. So I sort of devalued that, and I was like, it wasn't her fault. And
Mhm.
it was the opioid epidemic. So maybe the doctor didn't know, and maybe she didn't know, and maybe it was all just this like horrible comedy of errors.
Right.
Again, the gaslighting, like it's very easy to self gaslight. But one thing I've kind of learned is it often starts with something that as is actually going on with the kid, and that doesn't delegitimize if your mom takes that and runs with it.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a huge thing that I have heard many people say, like, do you ever feel like guilty or something, or like it was your fault? And I do all the time because I'm like, well, I do think for a while I very much like adopted the victim role because I mean, when you're a kid and that's the way you're getting love from your parent, you don't really know,
Yeah.
but what
Was
I can
your
say is I
father
don't deal
involved in your
um
life?
my my father was the very typical classic Munchausen by proxy father, and we do have a clinical picture of that. They are almost always present
Mm-hmm.
but completely uninvolved,
Hmm.
which I think is interesting. It's usually not like single moms. They're mostly married, but with a spouse that's just not not involved at
Present.
all.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
Oh, but
is
he
that his
also
general demeanor, or was that just like with like health stuff with the kids and stuff?
general demeanor. Like teachers would ask me if he was dead during school because he was just like so uninvolved in my life.
Wow.
Even though he was in the house, he just like stayed in like his own room, like a male Miss Havisham.
Yeah, just alone. Very
But
interesting.
ironically, it was his death that made me like realize what had happened to me because he died. I was finishing my PhD, which was on the Victorian history of how illness affects personal and family and community identity. And he died.
Hmm.
And after like a long, slow burning thing, like in the hospital, and like he would get better from this thing that they said he should have died from, and they'd send him home, and then he'd go back to the hospital, and then eventually he died. And suddenly it was his sister and my mom's sister in law both calling me and being like, I can't remember the exact conversations. What I remember is the feeling, which was like, ask questions, ask questions. And the minute I started, because one of them told me that multiple doctors and nurses had filed adult protective service claims against her. And I remember feeling really frustrated that somehow, like, if you're going to do that, nobody had, like, contacted me as, like, the other
Right.
kin. Because, I mean, he wasn't a great dad, but I wouldn't have let that happen to him. I wouldn't let that happen to anybody. But
Right.
I didn't know. And so the second I started saying, like, could she have been the reason he kept getting sick the minute he was discharged? Then I had to ask some tough questions about myself. Like, I'm an academic, my brain goes a mile a minute. Suddenly, I'm like, haven't all my friends from college like noticed that I never really was sick, even though I was sick and in remission? And haven't I not really been sick like a day since I left college? I don't even deal with psychosomatic pain anymore. Like, I would have thought maybe that was just who I am, but
Mm-hmm.
seems to have been the family structure.
Wow.
And probably morphine withdrawal here and there, keeping that going. And so, yeah, then I suddenly was like, holy crap, that was a lot of morphine, wasn't it? And I was able, because I felt very lucky, because I don't have medical records for myself.
Mm.
And for some people in the survivor community, because survivors we can have trouble trusting people,
Of course. I mean,
shockingly.
reasonable.
Um, Medical records for some people are like the proof that you need to prove that you're actually a survivor, that you're not actually like Munchausen by proxy.
Right.
Um, I don't have that. I never will. Like, I realized too late in life, and like one doctor lost his license for overprescribing opiates, so that's a little bit of proof.
Yeah.
The others have died. One has like conveniently expunged me from all their records.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah. I wish I had recorded that phone call because it was weird. But so I'm not going to have records, but I did have a child psychologist that I had visited when I was going through this as a teenager to help me cope with my pain diagnosis.
Hmm.
And I remember telling him how my mom had said that I had ADHD as a child, like a 9-year old, and that I didn't think I had that, but she was always like hassling me that I probably needed to be on ADHD medicine still. And he was like, no, like ADHD is my specialty and you're the complete opposite. Like you're like neurotic obsessive, which like confirmed. Like, yes,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
am. Um, and I was like, I looked at him and I was like, well, why would she say that then? And he was like, because she wanted to be the one who fixed you.
Hmm.
So I looked him up and I was like, I think that I realized this, and I think you were trying to tell me this, and I couldn't understand as a 16-year-old because I loved my mom as a 16-year-old. Like, she was like
Yeah.
my savior in my head. And I was able to go back to him in person and basically confirm those thoughts. Now, what's interesting and tricky, and there's just all sorts of barriers. Like I said, we don't even know what's happened to us, right? And until we know, and there's more than just me like screaming, we
Hmm.
won't get research, and which is why I'm so thankful to you. But another barrier is that the what he ended up saying to me was essentially, I can't diagnose somebody who wasn't my patient. You were my patient. Your mom wasn't the patient, so I can't tell you for sure that she had Munchausen by proxy.
Right.
So we have this like a diagnostic barrier because we as victims don't have a term. The term only exists to identify our abusers
User. Right.
who are never going to go into a doctor to try to figure this out.
Yeah. Interesting.
So
So, did you
yeah,
ever confront her about this?
no. One thing we know, there's one article about the adult after effects of surviving Munchausen by proxy, and it was like a lifeline to me when I was figuring all this out, just to feel like some of the things I was feeling were normal. But one thing we know is that most victims, of course, this was a study of like 8 people because we
Hmm.
can't find many survivors. One study showed that we tend to have a tendency to remain very scared of our mothers late into life, past when they can hurt us, but also weirdly sympathetic. And I embody that to a T. Like, I guess I would say I'm more empathetic than sympathetic. It's not right what she did, but I understand that she was very, very ill. I don't think she's capable of understanding any of it, and I'm terrified of her. I don't ever want her to know where I live. Um,
So, you are no contact with your parent now?
oh yeah, since I got pregnant, I think the mom in me was like, what I couldn't do for me, I could do for my kids. And
Hmm.
actually, like my story has like a really happy ending because I had a great aunt, so she's my grandmother's sister,
Hmm.
and her daughter, who's like my second cousin, adopted me late in life legally.
Oh, wow.
Um, so I would go live with them a lot when my mom like didn't want me or was too like drugged out on the couch to deal with me. And when I was about 30, they adopted me.
That's
um,
beautiful.
it really, I mean, part of it is because like they were my parents, but like they taught me how to love people. Like I don't know that I could be a mom if they hadn't showed me like what actual unconditional love is. But that also gave protection for my kids. So if God forbid something happened to me and my husband, then my biological mom would have no chance in hell of
Hmm.
ever having any kind of rights to my kids to be able to do this to them, and I think that's
Yeah. That's
something I
scary.
would recommend to all survivors, especially, or you. What if you were in a persistent vegetative state?
Yeah.
Do you want that abuser making any decisions about your, like,
Not
I
at all.
recommend everybody, yeah, get a living will or get an adult adoption so that
Yeah.
you don't get in a tragic situation where they have rights over you again.
Yeah. Now, what you were saying earlier about empathizing with, your abuser, I'm in the same boat. It's, I think, why I can relate so much to it, because I think it's very similar to abuse, right? So I always say survivor. So I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and I had to deal with the repercussions of that as I grew up and came into adulthood and realized, like, I don't want to carry this trauma with me as I'm, going into adulthood and forging new relationships and maybe potentially getting married or having a kid. Like, I want to be fixed before all that happens. That was my mindset. Um, and thankfully, like, therapy truly did help me, but it also, I was very close, or, still am, with my mom. But I had to reconcile the image I had of my mom when I was a child versus how I see her now as an adult. Because those are
Mm-hmm.
two very different things, right? I wasn't protected in the way I would expect a parent to protect their child. And you had to, like, that was probably one of the most difficult parts of my therapy, is coming to that realization and going, holy crap, like, I idolized my mom when I was little. She was my best friend. I talked to her every day. She didn't technically raised me past the age of 6 years old. I lived with my grandma, but she was a constant in my life. I mean, every single day we were talking. And then there was, when the abuse happened, was when I was in her custody, if you will. Um, and it was really difficult because I did the right thing as a child. I said what was happening, and it was like, okay, I think it was just her naivete as a, also, she was a survivor of abuse and, was going through her own thing too. And I had to realize, like, she was, for me at least, the she was doing the best that she could with the tools that she was given. And therapy is, a luxury in the States. It's not like we treat mental health, as a great thing. She didn't have the therapy that she needed to kind of get through her own trauma, and of course pass that trauma on to myself and my siblings. So once I realized that, and I was like, wow, I had to tell her, I was like, I don't have the same feelings about you that I did when I was younger. Like, I look at you very differently. I can't look back on those memories now because they're all tainted. They're all tainted with the knowledge that I have now.
Yeah.
And that's really difficult to reconcile. But I completely understand kind of what you're saying about, like, the empathy piece. But I'm so thankful for you that you had other adults in your life and other family members who are willing to step up to, for you, to be there for you and take you in, as opposed to maybe what others would have done, which was, sweep this under the rug and say, like, well, that's my family. And the kind of don't ask, don't tell, don't talk about it. No, family issues are in the family, don't publicize them, etc.
Yeah.
Um, I think that that's
I was
really
very
great because,
lucky.
yeah, it proves, I think, that they're with you on that, and they recognize that what happened to you wasn't right. Um, but
And I realize as an adult too, like it is hard to
yeah,
insert yourself in another nuclear family's drama. Like I think back
it
about
sure is.
my
You've been married.
now adopted grandma. Like she was like your typical like wonderful 1950s Southern housewife, and like the
Yeah.
amount of people who are like you're meddling, you're a butt-in, like she was hurt by that. It I
Hmm.
think caused her many sleepless nights. Um, but thank God,
Right.
like thank God that she
Thank God
told
she
me
didn't
she's like I
care.
just thought it. Yeah, she told me like I thought it just wasn't right that somebody was doing that to a kid, and I was somebody noticed. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's a huge part of why I've been able to be to overcome it as much. Like, I have my baggage. I have trouble going to doctors. I
Hmm.
fear illness. Like, I have trauma, but I think I'm as okay as I am because not just her physical actions, but the psychological realization that, like, somebody was watching and cared. I think that does, like you said, a lot for a kid.
Right.
Um, should we get into a little bit more about like what this abuse looked like
Yes,
just on the
absolutely.
grit?
Because I think it'll be helpful for others who are listening, who may even be questioning this, right? And going,
Yeah.
gosh, I I wonder if so and so, because I've wondered about this particular person doing XYZ. I think it's great to kind of share what it looked like for you and maybe what it looks like in general from the research that you've done.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mentioned it rather quickly. One thing that I feel, because I am a self-proclaimed like milder case, so I mentioned that spectrum, and um, yeah. So one thing that's interesting, I think, with Munchausen is that in many cases, the abusers that get away with it for longer, any one instance or occasion could look normal.
Mm.
Like I said, you could say that my mom was just misled by this awful doctor who was overprescribing everybody opiates, and she didn't know, and I was complaining of pain and she didn't know it was bad. You could say lots of kids were getting put on Ritalin in the late 90s because ADD was in vogue then.
Right.
You could say that lots of moms were giving their kids Benadryl in the 1980s to get their young children to sleep more. But when you see, like in my case, those are my three. I left out the Prozac when I was 7. I don't think that was as culturally common at that time. But it's when you put them all together in sort of a true crime framework, right? Like a black glove on the sidewalk might be a black glove, but a
Mm.
black glove outside of Nicole Brown's house after OJ was, it's circumstantial evidence, and for that stuff, I think you have to put it all together and say, can we excuse this same person all these things, or do we at the very least have to say that this was a pattern of over medicating that this person had? And one thing I'll add too that used to give me a lot of trouble is the motivation. Like, well, did she understand? Did she mean to do this? Was she really doing it to get attention? They have taken the motivation out of the DSM diagnoses
Mm.
because I believe it's been taken out. I could have gotten a little bit of the nuances wrong, but they basically realized that, like, we don't ask why a drug addict does drugs. We don't say, like, well, they have to be doing it to self medicate versus some other reason.
Right.
We look at the behavior and we say, like, that is what drug addiction looks like. People are anxious for different reasons. That's not in the DSM, but Munchausen by proxy, we put this motivational factor. And I felt a lot of peace when I heard that either has been or will be taken out or sort of emphasized less or something, because it allowed me to stop gaslighting in that way and saying, like,
Mm.
well, because you never know what another person thinks or why they did it. What I do know is I weighed 80 pounds and I was on 80 milligrams of morphine a day for 2 years. I do know by looking at that doctor's records that people who were drug seeking were clearly finding him to get their drugs. I do know she was a drug addict and getting her drugs from him. So, like, she
Oh,
knew
wow.
enough,
Yeah.
even in the opioid epidemic. And I think more than, like, yeah, but I also think they probably do use a lot of somewhat culturally justifiable things, like Ritalin in the 90s, and so you can't look at that one instance and be like, oh, that person's kid shouldn't be on Ritalin. They must have Munchausen by proxy. I think you have to look at the global picture of, like, is everything this kid doing being pathologized by their parent? Because I sure was.
Right.
My real mom, my adopted mom, can recall, like, being prepared to meet me as this, like, horror of a 9-year-old that was just so awful. And then she met me and was like, she's a
Mm.
kid, like,
Any other
there's
kid?
a, yeah,
That's
yeah. And so I
crazy.
think there's this, beyond the actual treatments and testing, it also is this way of saying that the kid's identity is illness, essentially.
Hmm. I mean, yeah, even in the most recognized cases, that's really what it was. It truly is making it part of their identity so much so that even if they try, they couldn't walk away from it.
Yeah. I
A lot. It's a lot.
I had an issue where somebody in the survivor community, like, was kind of harassing me and saying like I wasn't really a survivor. And um, I think my charitable view is that I was too excited to meet other survivors on TikTok, and I was a little bit like freaked them out. But they kind of went crazy, and then I went crazy. Like I started like I was like, what if I'm lying about everything? What if
Right.
like how do you even gaslight
Invalidate
yourself
somebody
into
else.
thinking? Yeah, well, and it worked on me. Like I was sitting here being like, maybe I have been lying. Like, who does
Yeah.
that? Like,
Well,
how
I
do you
mean, you're
even? Of
so
course, I'm
used
not lying.
to it's what I forgot what it was called, but you've basically like trained your brain. It's something somebody I actually just saw it where an audiobook narrator was talking about how they they heard a click in their audio and their brain automatically knows to stop and that they need to reset and redo the line, but they kept going, but their brain was like, whoa, 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 and so they fumbled over words, etc. And I think that when you are subject to such long-term abuse and such manipulative abuse, that it's easy to question your own reality, right? Your own
Yes.
perception 100%. So it
One
makes
thing I've
sense.
learned in therapy is that, in particular for me, but I think probably for a lot of people, you're also trained to not trust your own sense of your own body
Correct.
or your perceptions. You're trained that other people have to know that for you. And so, yeah, if somebody says you're lying, like I have a tendency to be like, oh God, I must be. But in that, I reached out online and I asked everybody who knew me, like, tell me when I first told you about this or when you first knew, so that like I feel like I have.
Validation there.
Like yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the number of like teachers would reach out and being like, oh, your mom, even in high school, because I was like really good student, even though I was never in school. And she was like, "Yeah, your mom like told me that you were born with oppositional defiant disorder, which you probably know is like a precursor to getting you diagnosed with antisocial
Yeah.
personality." Like to this day, like I've never done a drug. Like
You're doing great if you have it,
I'm the
you
most
know?
pro-social. Like but she
Wow.
would do this. She would like even go behind like trying to undermine like school being this safe place for me where I excelled somehow miraculously in spite of never being in school.
Right.
Um I mean and it actually really that was hard to hear the extent to which she was going like even as a teenager and telling these teachers that I was just like destined to be this like criminal. She would say that and that if I wasn't it was because she had done behavioral things to get me to not be a criminal.
That's and I think I mean, you look at it as a mom now. I'm a mom too, right? I can't imagine the lack of care and love that you have to
Mm,
like not have for your child to be able
mm.
to do something like that because it's supposed to be the act like the opposite. Like I'm gassing my kid up and she's 18 months and I'm like, "You're the best. You're awesome. You're amazing." And I'm also like, "But you also don't need people's approval. Screw them if they they don't like you, you know?"
Yes,
Going back
yes.
and forth with that, but it it makes me sad for you as a teenager because I know how impactful that is. You said earlier that your mom was your favorite person when you were like 16 and stuff, and that's really sad. Just to think about, I think from a kid's perspective, how much love that you're holding for that person, and
Yeah.
they have none of it back for you. It's
I
so
think the
hard.
hardest thing, like, I mostly feel I get more upset when I listen to other survivors. I think I have a fair amount of dissociation from my own,
Yeah, trauma.
just like, yeah, I just tell it like very matter of factly. But
Yeah,
listening to other survivors is hard. And watching my daughters now be the ages that I was when I was abused, that can break me just
yeah.
thinking about it for a second. Like, my youngest daughter is vibrant and dramatic and full of life and big in everything she does, and she is exactly like me. My preschool teacher is on this
Oh,
video right
amazing.
now. And
Shout them out. We love teachers.
Marianne, I found her like a year or so ago and was like, I've
Oh,
missed you my whole life. um, but like I was exactly like that, and the one thing that can kind of break me, and I'm hoping I don't break down when I try to say this, is I look at her and I see the qualities that my mom was trying to crush under Benadryl.
Mm,
And like it's hard to explain that because it's hard to say like I don't mean that I want to. I
yeah.
mean that like I understand that a mother should love and cherish these things even when they're freaking hard, even when sometimes you're like, "Oh my god, kid, I'm exhausted." And sometimes talking to you feels like I'm tripping on
Oh my
acid because
gosh.
you're
Yeah.
talking about like life
Everything.
on other galaxies and like and you never stop moving, but god, you're my kid. I love
Yeah.
you. I'm the one person who's supposed to love you more than anybody and show you how to make those qualities like everything they can be in life and
Right.
how to manage your big feelings so that uh so you don't have trouble with like I don't know, feelings are hard, and have
Yeah.
it being
Feelings
a
suck.
very emotional person.
Yeah.
It's my job to help you, and it breaks my heart sometimes when I look through the lens of me with my daughter, who is a lot like how I was, and realizing that she didn't love it. She saw something to shape and control and crush, and like
Yeah.
for me, I don't care. I don't care if she did it to me, but when I look at how beautiful it is in my daughter, then I can kind of see it almost like looking through a prism. I really can't. I have like a block there for caring about that she did it to me.
Hmm.
But yeah,
No, I completely understand that. And it breaks my heart again for you for that. Um, I think anybody who has a heart, I think, would feel that way. Um, but I'm curious, have you shared the experience you had with your children and what happened?
We finally told my 7.5-year old, I think last year at Christmas. My adoptive mom, is watching this as well.
Oh,
So
amazing.
she was with me, and because Flora, my daughter, only knows my adoptive mom as her nanny.
Grandma.
That's her
Oh, okay.
nanny. My adoptive mom cut her umbilical cord. She was there through
Oh,
40 hours of labor. Like, that's her grandma.
yeah.
But, you hear that you can't just not tell them that if they're adopted. And so we thought we better tell her once she's old enough to really process a little bit that it doesn't
Yeah.
really matter, that it doesn't change our family. And we did. And that was fine. But over that, there's been a few questions here and there about, like, well, what was your mom? Like, what? And
Oh
we just
man, and kids
tell them
are
that,
just so
yeah,
inquisitive and ask these really kind of gut-wrenching questions, and you're like, I can't even explain that to you yet. You're not capable
exactly.
yet of understanding it. And so
I
you
am
really have
perhaps
to like
hyper
elementary it.
conscious
Yeah.
conscious of the fact that like when my kid gets a stomach ache as a mom,
Mhm.
you literally always are the proxy for your kid. They can't make medical decisions for themselves. And not making a decision is sometimes a decision,
Right.
Like, let's say they're just constipated and you don't do anything. Like, that can be uncomfortable for them. But how do you choose when to intervene in constipation? Like, we're always making decisions for these bodies that we can't actually feel, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing I've learned is that we're training them how to understand their bodies. Like, I know that from me because, and a lot of survivors will say this, that like we don't have a normal baseline for our bodies. I tend to freak out over this, like the smallest thing could mean I'm dying. And
Mm.
then things that really matter, um, I'll be like weirdly indifferent, like
Oh,
health wise.
interesting.
And a lot of people say this, and
Oh.
I don't know why it's warped that way, but anyway, so I think about a lot. Like, if my daughter comes to me with a stomach ache, I'm like, I'm the one choosing to teach her, well, that means you're probably hungry. Let's try that first. That means you probably ate too much. Let's try that first. Or it means you're dying. We're the ones that give them these
Right.
senses,
Yes.
or these baselines. And so I have not gone into specifics about Munchausen by proxy because I'm perhaps maybe too paranoid that if I teach her at 7 that like what you think you know about your body could be fake for 20, like I feel like that
Yeah.
could break a person.
No, I think so. I think so. Yeah. I have like hypochondria, right? So because my grandma to the extreme of everything. Like she never did anything towards me or anything, but it was always like the way that she treated her own like illnesses and cramps and things, even still to this day, it's like she's practically dying. And as soon as she goes to the doctor, they're like, yeah, no, you need to drink water, like you're dehydrated, like what are you what are you talking about? You don't
Yeah.
have any like weird blood disorder or anything. So like this started with me too, because I saw that in her. And then the doctor would be like, you're fine, you're good. They do all these tests. So like we go get checked out, right? Like that's our thing. It's like I freak out. I make my husband go. I'm like, wow, my bone in my knee hurts for some reason. Can you Google the symptoms of bone cancer? Because I feel like that's what I have, and it'll be like
And
one
do
or
you
two
make him
things.
Google it so that
Oh,
he can
100%.
censor it and not like freak you out? Because
Yes.
that's what I do. My husband has to do my Googling where like
Yeah.
I'm like, you don't tell, I can't see the thing that says like, this is the symptom you're dying, or I might start worrying
Yeah,
that
and
I
I'll
have it. But
cry if I see it.
I don't know if this is an hour or an hour and a half, but should we take, are there any questions from
Let
people
me
we should take?
see. So I am so sorry, you guys. Thank you for coming on. So, no, everybody so far is just like really applauding your braveness for coming forward and
Oh,
sharing your story. So,
oh,
thank you all for saying that
oh,
to Dr. Nixon.
that's
That is
very
so
nice.
kind.
I do not feel
Um,
like a brave person.
no, my gosh, you are incredible. It takes a lot to be able to share this and be so vulnerable with strangers, right? That these are going to be
Mm,
people that listen later on to the podcast that are either watching you live now or will tune in later. And it is, it's a lot because people have opinions about things. There's going to be things we probably say here that people won't like for some reason. And to that, I say, okay, great, move on about your day,
yeah.
unless there's something like I got wrong or you got wrong, that they're coming, to us with grace and understanding, then sure. But for me, as it relates to you sharing your own story, you sharing your own perspective on what you lived, I can't have anybody come and discount that, right? So like it kind of pisses me off that somebody was trying to invalidate your own experience because it wasn't their experience. It wasn't my thing. So
Mm.
we don't do that here in this place. We do not do that, you guys. So no,
Well,
I'm
my
very
best
glad.
friend girl squad is like alerting me that they're trying to ask questions.
Oh,
So
cool. Hold on.
there might be one coming through. So just so you know. Do we
Sure.
have just 3 more minutes? Or
Oh no,
how long
keep
do we
going.
have?
I don't really
Okay,
care. You
yay,
can
yay.
continue.
All
So
right.
let's see. No,
It might take a minute. They're like,
are they
one of
doing
them
it on the?
can't,
Okay.
they're texting me. And
Oh,
I'm like, guys, I can't. But one of
typically,
them
if
is getting the
you
other one to ask. So
yes, if you press the react button and you select an emoji, then you are able to ask a question. So, for instance, if you press the thumbs up, you can add a message to that, and that will have you put questions in. Um, Sorry for that.
yeah. Well, and I think on an issue like this, so I teach now a lot of what's called medical humanities, which is just like social ways to think about medicine. Again, like can't imagine why I do this. Um, and I tell my students that awareness campaigns generally are useless. Like I make my students make public health campaigns at the end of the semester, and like I won't let them make like a breast cancer awareness campaign because they we have awareness, but in Munchausen by proxy, like we're still in the awareness building phase.
Yeah,
People do not think we are here, that we exist. Another goal of being on your show was to get like other creators to hear that like there's more than me. Like I have at least three other survivors like at the ready who would like to talk to any podcasters who want to talk to them. People don't need to just hear my story. They don't need to hear just the most extreme Gypsy Rose Blanchard and then me. They need
right,
all versions. Just like with sexual abuse, we had to learn that like the spectrum and different things counted as like grooming a kid. We
right.
need all these examples. So if there is even anybody is like oh, you got this wrong, to them I would just say like great, like shout louder
Share.
about it so that there's more
Yeah,
research. Like I could very well be wrong on things because we know so little. Like
right.
so don't tell me, tell a doctor, tell somebody who can make a difference, tell a podcaster to get us on your shows. Like
Yeah. I think honestly, I mean, I'm happy to do a bigger thing for this to include other survivors. We typically, it's so weird that you mentioned this because we typically take a break around the 16th of December. And so we don't have any content planned, right, for the actual show. And so what I wanted to do was like, oh, I want to do just a bunch of live streams. It wouldn't necessarily be on the app, it would be like on StreamYard. So we could do it on a bigger platform and kind of go across multiple platforms outside of just the Fireside app. But if we want to do something like that where we're sharing survivor stories and sharing more information, I'm happy to do that and offer the platform that I have to be
Wow.
able to share that information, you know?
Lainey.
Yes,
Oh.
I can hear you.
Yeah, no, it's just that's just
Oh.
so awesome.
Oh,
Like,
oh, I thought you lost connection.
oh, sorry, sorry, sorry.
I was like, no, I hear you.
No.
You're fine.
No, no. That's just like
Yeah, I mean, my thing is like everybody deserves to have a voice. Everybody deserves to be able to share their stories. And, if we have a platform, we should be able to utilize it in a way that's positively affecting this community. I think too often creators are just looking to monetize off of the most salacious content that they can disseminate. And it really is changing. Like the landscape of true crime is changing. And I am so happy, so honored to be a part of that, that I was inspired enough by other survivors to make that change within myself. It's why I changed the name of the show. It's no longer, True Crime Fan Club. It is truly true crime cases. And it took me a while to get there, but it took meeting survivors and understanding what was going on, and how things like that can impact them. um, it,
ugh,
it's the
this
it's the
means so
very
much.
least that I could do. It's truly the very least. And honestly, I mean, I think if you meet with Javier, I'm not going to put you out there, Javier, but I'm just going to pressure you a little bit. Um, but he's an incredible journalist, an incredible storyteller, and I think that being able to work with him too, and maybe creating something like that with other survivors that you can get in contact with, I think is just going to create incredible content, that's captivating, because this is truly an area you don't know about, right? You don't think about
Mhm.
the survivors of this crime or of
Yep.
this abuse. You only hear of the victims who lost their lives,
Yep.
truly, and that's
Yep.
it. And it was so poignant to me seeing really your plea. That's what it felt like to me. It's just like, you use the same phrase I do, which is like yelling out into the ether. That's usually me telling the trolls. With this last episode I did, where I was like, "You're yelling into an ether, dude. I don't. My toxic trait is engaging with trolls." But it's the same thing. It's like I want when I see things like that, I don't want to just scroll past it and go, that's not really something I know anything about, so I'm not going to bother. Like, yeah, I covered 2 cases on Munchausen, but I did my job, that was it. No, I was like, "You know what? I was irresponsible in my coverage. I was irresponsible in the Lacey, thing, and I was irresponsible, in other cases of Munchausen that I shared on the show, and I didn't reach out to anybody." And so my reason for doing this is to kind of make amends for that to my own self and to the audience that listens and tunes in and trusts me to share these cases with them. So I'm only thankful to you truly for giving me the opportunity to have you on here, um, because it truly is about you and what we can do better as creators in this genre, if you will, to support you, because that's really what we should be doing. We should be supporting people who want to share their stories in some capacity. And I get it. I, you know, I have a show that's narrative only, but I created something
Crimes of
to,
Passion.
oh, yeah, but that's ending. So boo on them.
That's my that's my airplane show when I'm
Yeah, now
on
you have
long
to listen to true
flights.
crime cases. But yes, I'm recording the final episode this week. Fun story to that if you haven't been paying attention to it, but I found out via the Hollywood Reporter that I actually lost the job. So I was like, I got fired in the most like Hollywood of way, and it was so great. I can laugh about it now, but it was not great when I first saw it. But interesting
No.
stuff, interesting stuff. But no, I created this live show and this platform to be able to do this because I am so interested in learning about things that I don't know about, and then also offering support and a platform. I realize the platform I have and what I can offer And so I hope it only encourages other creators to reach out or to say, like, hey, who else do you have? I think it would make, you know, great content, which is why I'm happy to offer the platform to you and other survivors who want to come on and share their stories. It only serves the community and serves other individuals who may be experiencing this themselves and have no clue that it's happening, or maybe need to reconcile with some things that even happened to them as children, you know? So,
Yeah. Yeah, it means so much because I think, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, I think we're just now in true crime in the genre having this sort of revolution where we consider victims' families if, let's say, they were murdered. But, people do want to interview survivors of violent crime.
true.
And so it just struck me that, like, we are here, like, we do exist. And, um, yeah, like, and I don't know, like you said, I don't know that we have the most like dramatic survival stories in terms of like an action movie, but I think there are certain things I've seen in survivors, certain common traits that I think it took to get out, and I think that it does matter. Like we had to work hard because um I think one thing abusers do is try to keep us from having like independent living skills. So just
Hmm.
even like learning to drive, learning to drink water. I never drank water until I was 21. Like
How
I
did you
was not
survive?
taught Coca-Cola. It's
Oh my
apparently
gosh.
possible. Yeah.
Oh
I mean,
man.
like, so you think about reasons you feel sick, but I hear this like so frequently that like they would kind of encourage you to eat terrible food. And what teenager is going to turn down junk food every day?
True.
But then like, yeah, you do kind of feel like garbage all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm getting questions. What do you wish allies would do, and what has helped me heal most as a survivor? Right now, what I wish allies would do is just talk to everybody. Talk to everybody. Do what I'm doing. Talk to the like ice cream man. Talk to the person who picks up your trash. Like just like I said, like I actually am a scholar of like how we write health issues in society, and generally, I say awareness is not enough
Hmm.
unless it's like my example is like if you've discovered a new kind of cancer, then like yeah, you do need to awareness build for a bit, and I think that Munchausen by proxy is an epidemic of unknown proportions. Almost all the literature agrees to some extent that it's vastly underdiagnosed and we don't know how much. I have no reason to think that it's less common than any other form of child abuse. And
Mm.
I do think we just need people like planting that seed everywhere that it can be there. Like, so that if a teacher, sees something a little odd, maybe they're quicker to say something. People are scared of falsely flagging moms, but there's a study I've heard about that I don't know if it's in review or if it's been published, but I was told by one of the scholars that studies Munchausen by proxy that in one retrospective study they did, there was really no incidence of false flagging. Like, generally, one's instincts are pretty good, at least at the expert level. So, if you, as like a mom or a friend or a neighbor, if you reported something, like it's probably not going to go forward unless there's really a problem. And I
Right.
would say that many of us survivors are like, either why didn't somebody do something sooner? Or in my case, like, thank God somebody at some point, intervened.
Right.
Um, yeah, so that's, I would say allies just like talk about it constantly. Say it's common. Say you have a friend. Say you saw this lady on the show.
Right. And we
And
had
ask
another
your
question come
podcast
in.
content creators, like
Mhm.
ask other, like bother all the other podcasters to do what Lainey's doing,
Yes.
like, and what Javier did. Like,
Yes.
it's not that hard to just talk to us.
It isn't. And trust me, you'll be okay, even if you're nervous to do it. I totally get it. But the literal worst that somebody could say is, no, I don't want to talk to you about that. And you move on. We did get a comment or a question on YouTube, and the question was coming in from, I don't want to mispronounce your name, so apologies ahead of time. But Rupal Mather, what has helped you the most as a survivor to heal from the abuse?
Uh,
Or are you still healing?
yeah, yeah. Rupal, who is my other maid of honor, has been a huge part of that. Sweet Rupal is a doctor, and so like the number of times she has had to deal with me being like, I'm dying. And she's so sweet and patient with me. Um, I realized what happened to me through both my dad dying and my aunts asking questions, and also a benign breast lump that
Mm,
I don't know, like I just couldn't accept that it was benign, and I had like what I like reminded me of like a 1950s style like mental breakdown. Like I
mm,
was not okay. And it was through going to therapy through that my therapists were like, I can vividly remember they triaged me into therapy, which meant like you didn't have to wait because it was free grad student therapy.
mm,
And so that's another reason I speak out so much, because not everybody has access to the free therapy, the tens of thousands of dollars of free therapy I got to realize what happened to them. So like I'll try to help like for free
yeah.
by just yelling about it. But I remember I had to fill out this form, and it was like, what was your mother like? Did she have any mental health conditions? And I literally physically said out loud, because I was like weeping about how I was certain I was dying of cancer, even though the doctor said I was fine. And I remember saying out loud under my breath, like, what does my mom have to do with any of this? Like, I was so mad at the form.
Mm,
And now I'm like, oh,
yeah.
yeah, so I mean, poor Rupal, like she was part of that with me, like where I'd be like, well, but now I'm dying because of this. And eventually, and I think it must have been the hardest thing to say as a friend, because we're so close that like we're like sisters. And so we can kind of squabble and get mad at each other kind of easily. It must have been so hard for her to say, like, don't you think this is getting a little out of hand, that like
Yeah.
you need to talk to somebody? Because I I can be a real jerk. I think she
Just
must have been like
saying.
really brave to say that to me. But then it was she and my other friend that I mentioned, Amy, that like they were there on the phone with me every day. It was like going through the looking glass where like I remembered everything of my life the same. Everything was the same. They were not like new recovered memories, but all the memories meant different things. Like what
Hmm.
you were saying with your mom, the memories are tainted now. So
Hmm.
I would call them and just be like, what the hell? I mean, like, I just, I never realized that it was weird for your mom to like crush up pills and mix it with sugar and feed it to you on a spoon. And like, they were the people like
Yeah.
every day being like, well, fuck, Kari. Like,
Yes. It is. Yeah. You have to have those people in your life that kind of can give it to you 100% because so often you're lied to, right? To
yeah,
as a comfort measure, and it doesn't help because you're trying to like work through these issues and truly being able to have somebody kind of refocus your shift and say it's completely 100% effed up. Yes.
yes,
Yes it is,
yes,
need people in your
yes.
life to tell you that, to
I would
validate
say,
it.
because I realized I did not answer the question. I'm sorry. The probably the best thing that's like been helpful to me is, well, I think my research is part, like I think it was therapy, the way I was piecing together in a completely different context Victorian infectious disease, how disease shapes you. So like I wrote a book on COVID, that's available through Simon and Schuster, that like people have said it helped them like live again after COVID anxiety. And I think I only have that perspective about illness and illness anxiety from what I went through, but I think my writing was a way for me to like heal. But the most concrete thing that anybody ever did was one of my therapists had me write a letter. Like it's like half a page long, and I bring it into every new doctor,
Mm,
and it would be different for every survivor based on your needs, but it basically says, I am a survivor of this thing. I am writing you a letter, even though that feels very weird, and I feel like a weirdo for doing it, because I get so flustered in front of doctors that I cannot say these things that I'm saying to you in this letter. Here are my needs as a patient. And for me, it's saying like I'm often very, very scared of dying of cancer, but over testing and even just blood tests for me, like were the tool of my abuse.
Mm.
Like I said, I'm a mild case. I wasn't put under surgeries or anything, but I was blood tested so much that my veins are scarred. Like I had a phlebotomist tell me that
Mm.
like a year ago. I was like, really? Like there's like history of this in my body. Okay. Um, so, what might seem simple to you as a doctor to reassure me, because you get, especially in America, they fear getting sued for liability.
Oh, for sure.
What may feel very small to you is like, oh, we'll reassure you through a blood test, like is not what I need. I need you to pretty much like stand in the corner, look away from me, don't touch me, and tell me I'm fine.
Right.
That would make a lot of patients feel really invalidated, right? Like
Right.
a lot of people would hate that. And as weird as it is to have this little letter, I think everyone should probably just say, I'm a survivor of this thing. Yes, I know it's a little weird to send you this letter, but I am scared of you, and you need
Yeah.
to understand that I can't articulate myself very well in person. And then here are my unique needs. Honestly, it's so weird. I get so nervous every time I do it because it's weird. Every single doctor, though, comes in and breathes like the biggest sigh of relief I've ever seen a doctor breathe. And do you know what they say? They say, I have to do this like 30 times a day. I have 15 minutes per patient. Every patient has baggage, history, needs, values. And usually I have 15 minutes to guess how
All of
all of
that.
those circulate around the headache you have,
Hmm.
right? And so honestly, just to to normalize that a bit, if anybody is like, because it is, I hate it. I feel like a little kid bringing a note in,
No,
but
I
like
think that's actually
they
really
honestly
smart.
love it. They
Yeah.
love it, and honestly, I will say like probably doctors are a little bit extra careful around me because of that, and that's great for me. I'm like, you know what, you guys owe it to me. Like on behalf of your profession, you guys can be
Right.
a little bit extra careful to keep me happy. And so I
Correct.
do think that prevents patients from being re traumatized by a doctor who doesn't know and perhaps does something careless or is in a bad mood that day or rushed. I mean, doctors are people.
Right.
But for us, one bad experience with the doctor can set us back like years. It really
Correct.
can. So I think the note helps by it actually does make the doctor like a little bit more cautious.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, I have a lot of doctor friends, so I think they would love that because they're like, yeah, especially those ER doctors. So we got a question in from Amy who wants to know how this experience influenced your research.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think just like when you think about the fact that like my dissertation and first book were on public anxiety about disease, like
Hmm.
it's pretty. I mean, I vividly remember being in therapy one day with this very French therapist who I feel like by all rights should have been like smoking a really long cigarette during therapy. She was so French. And she was like, you mean to tell me that your mother told you you were sick your whole life, and now you think you are dying, and you are writing a book on how family structures impact our sense that we are ill or well, and you do not see the connection. And and I like until that moment, I was like, no, I thought I just liked disease. I don't know. I never thought about it. Like,
Thought I was just interested in these things. No, I think
yeah,
that's incredible. And it honestly, it helps. I mean, it's great that you wrote the book on COVID and that you've been contacted by people who are like, that really helped me. And I think that's part of the healing process is being able to help others with, sharing your story or even sharing new research on these things. I can only imagine how impactful it will be for somebody who feels validated in their own experience who may feel the same way of like, yeah, I wasn't, given multiple surgeries or I didn't have these like harmful things happen to me, or I was disfigured in some way. Um, because again, like you said, it's a spectrum. This abuse is a spectrum. But it doesn't make it less valid and it doesn't make it less impactful because you weren't scarred or disfigured. The scars and disfigurement can't be seen, and that's much like we deal with these invisible illnesses, right? Like fibromyalgia, for instance. Um, Oftentimes, people who are seeking treatment for that and have to go through these battery of tests to, figure out that they have it and finally come to a diagnosis, they're shut down a lot of times. They switch doctors frequently. I think part of that is the record retention and the sharing of records, and especially as it pertains to medical records, it's such a huge problem, because there isn't one big database that says here's
Yes.
all the things that have happened that Kari has gone through and has experienced and has surgeries with, so that doctors are educated, because this is
Mm.
also one way that people get away with abuse, even with opioid abuse, is doctor shopping. They go to whoever
Yes.
they can.
And
So
moms with Munchausen definitely do that. And like, I actually, I like you. Like one of my only like, I don't know exactly how we fix this problem. Like I said, I'm in the awareness building phase, but the one idea I've had for a while is like if we had more integrated electronic medical records, which experts say would decrease our healthcare costs nationally anyway.
right.
I think it would have to be simpler to see when a parent was doing this. It would just have to be.
It would be 100%, but you know, that's a whole thing. My husband's in information security, and he's just like, medical records are the least secure records on the planet. There's hospital systems, etc. They're terrible. Not to scare anybody, but just FYI, they suck.
Yeah.
Which is why I don't put my social security number on anything when I go to the doctor's office, because it's just begging to be stolen if you do that. So
Mm,
just a little quick PSA: they don't need it for any
yeah.
reason, at all. So you don't have to give it to them on some random piece of paper, that they are going to electronically file away. Your insurance carrier does that, so be educated in that
Yeah.
piece. That's my only piece of awareness. But I want to just thank you too for joining me today. It's been incredibly educational for me. It's been motivating for me to want to help and do more, especially as it relates to this particular, you know, I think maybe because I've been abused, I understand that feeling. And so, my whole goal is, again, to give a voice and to give a platform to whoever wants it and wants to share their stories. So hopefully we can connect again and bring more survivors on to kind of have a big little, um, big open ended discussion, and have other people join us, and maybe other creators join us who are much better interviewers than I am, and can have, some this is a great opportunity, I think, for other creators to join in on these discussions, so that they don't feel as intimidated by reaching out, and really realizing that there are actual tangible human beings behind these cases that you're sharing. They want to be heard, and they really truly deserve it. I mean, we wouldn't have the platforms we have without survivors or without these family advocates
Mm.
speaking up on behalf of on behalf of victims or anything like that. So we have to really be thankful for that and kind of bow down and say, like, I wouldn't have any of this. I wouldn't be successful in this if it wasn't for the people whose stories I'm sharing.
Mm.
So it only makes sense that we're kind of being able to pay the individuals back for this. Um, so I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to have you on. I do have to wrap up because I've gone over a little bit, but
Yes.
that's okay. I think it's been an interesting discussion. I do want to have and continue it, even with other survivors who want to come on a bigger website, if you will, so that we can have more people on, and it's a little easier to ask questions. So Fireside is new for me. So you, like I told you, you taught me something new that you can actually watch from the web. So that's awesome. That's incredible. But please let people know where they can find you, where they can follow you, and if you want to, share your book with us, the names and titles. I think you had two,
Yeah.
right?
I have like three or four, but the
Okay,
main one,
look at you.
I my toxic trait is writing books about everything I'm interested in. My main one that's written for like general audiences is called Quarantine Life from Cholera to COVID: What Pandemics Teach Us About Parenting, Work Life, and Community. It's I know we're sick of COVID, but most people say it's not like the read you think it's going to be. It's very therapeutic and kind of fun, actually. I have a whole chapter called "Let's Talk About Death, Baby." Um,
Nice.
yeah, we had to talk about like rights from TLC and like if we had to get permission to use that line. But Salt and Pepper, not TLC. Wow, it's
That's
4 a.m.
okay.
here, so.
That's okay.
Um, yeah, and on TikTok, I'm at DiseaseDocPhD. On Twitter, for however long it exists, I'm
I know. Who
hashtag
knows?
shadows. Um, And I have to say, like, there was one moment when you were talking where this part of my brain just like went into like listener mode, and I was
Oh my
like, I'm
gosh.
talking to Lady Hunt.
I am no one. So that's thank you.
No, no, you're like major like ASMR. You're my airplane listen. Like, oh, you have the best voice, and I can't believe I actually get to talk to you. I never would have ever imagined that.
Oh my gosh. Too kind. Far too kind. Thank you so much. I am not good at accepting compliments, but I will do my best
Yeah,
just to
me
tell
either.
you thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
But anyways, I appreciate everybody who's joined us on Twitch and on YouTube. Thank you so much for coming on. And even on the Fireside app, thank you for giving it a try and trying it out with me. It's a new platform. You know, I always like to try new things. So that's just kind of where we're at with it. But I'll also include a link in the show notes so that you can follow Dr. Nixon wherever she likes to be followed. I'll also include links to the books. We support independent bookstores, so I will be linking those to ensure that we are not buying from big box sellers and that we are supporting indie bookstores. Um, but any parting words you'd like to share with our audience as we wrap it up?
No.
Okay. That's okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much again for joining me. I hope you have a great rest of the evening and a good morning to Dr. Nixon because she's joining us all the way from friggin' Norway, you guys. So thank you for staying up or waking up early and starting your day early. I don't know which one you did,
I'm
but
going
I
back to bed
appreciate it.
as soon as we
Okay,
quit.
awesome.
That sounds great.
Well, thank you again. And I hope that everybody has a good rest of the evening, good morning, good day, and we will connect.